So my panelist, and I'm hoping they do most of the talking from now on, is Dave Ecklund. He's the Emergency Management and Public Order Incident Safety and Security Unit lead for Toronto Police Service, and primarily for right now his life is revolving around FIFA 2026. So Toronto's got a big role in it, and sharing that with all the other cities. Dave is a superintendent with Toronto Police Service, serving for over 30 years in divisions including major crime, intelligence services, the homicide squad, strategy management, and as executive officer for the Westfield Command. So Dave, I just wanted to introduce you, and you can add to your bio if you like, or any stories or anything you want to share real quick.
Sure, thank you, John. Thank you for being here. This is such a humbling experience already, and I'm looking forward to meeting a lot of you as we prepare for the 2026 World Cup in Toronto. Listening to Joseph speak, we all get brought back to that day, and it's one of those moments in our lives, even from Toronto in a different country, where we all really remember where we were when we started hearing and seeing the news reports. And if I can tell a quick story.
Yes.
Now, my wife has a saying, and it's Dave, land the plane, because I can be long-winded sometimes, and my kids say that, Dad, land the plane. So when I was 12 years old, I had a bone marrow transplant for a disease called aplastic anemia. Ultimately, I had a bone marrow transplant for my brother Michael. When I went and started high school and turned old enough to donate blood back, because I had about 24 blood transfusions during my transplant, I wasn't able to donate because they never figured out what the cause was. So fast forward a few more years, I'm in university, could not donate blood. I always felt I wanted to give back. So when I turned 25, I joined the job when I was 20 years old. So 5 years later, where I'm sort of getting my feet under me as being a police officer, I decide I'm going to volunteer for Canadian Blood Services. And I go through an application interview process, and I remember them asking me, you're a police officer in the big city, why do you want to volunteer for Canadian Blood Services? I mean, we're going to put you at a clinic, and you're going to be giving out juice and cookies and chips to donors. And in Canada, people donate blood for free. They don't get paid for it. And I said, that's exactly what I need. I need to remain grounded. I need to know that there are normal people out there that want to help other people. So they accepted me, and they said, okay, we're going to put you at your first clinic. You're going to go to Woodside Square, which is a mall in Scarborough, coincidentally where I grew up. And they said, your first clinic, you're going to show up, it's going to be on September 11th, 2001. That was the year. So I was working evening shift, and I had gone to that clinic that morning. As I'm driving to the clinic, the news is coming in of these planes hitting the Twin Towers and everything else that was going on. And I got to Woodside Square, we were set up, and I remember turning around, and there was a lineup down the mall, out the doors, of people showing up to donate blood to help victims from 9/11. So that's sort of my, where were you and what were you doing? And it really just sort of, I think, highlights the impact that it had, not only obviously in the United States and New York, but in my little hometown of Scarborough, which is a suburb of Toronto. It had an impact all over the world, and people just felt compelled to do something. So thank you for that time. I hope I didn't take too much time.
Great. And our next panelist is Alastair Vanner. He's the Detective Superintendent and the UK Senior Liaison for Counterterrorism Policing in North America. So he gets to spend his time here. Didn't travel from overseas, from DC only. So Alastair has over 22 years of service with Met Police, where he led major investigations into terrorism, homicide, and serious crime, including the 2017 London attacks and the murder of Sir David MS, who was a Minister of Parliament, right?
That's right.
Said it right. Okay,
Yeah,
good,
yeah.
thanks. Since 2024, he has served as the Senior Liaison for Counterterrorism Policing in the U.S. and Canada, overseeing international law enforcement engagement and leading the UK response to the 2025 New Orleans terrorist attacks. And just as an aside, Toronto and the Met Police are two of the places where we have NYPD posts around the world, and couldn't ask for two better law enforcement partners in the world. They're just, as both agencies are committed to collaboration, as we described, but also just a partnership and a willingness to share their best lessons with all of us. So, thanks very much. So we're going to run through some questions here, and I think at the end Sue's going to throw it on us. Yes, she's good. So,
John, can I just, sorry.
Yeah, Alastair,
Yeah.
sorry. I apologize.
No,
Yes.
not
Yeah,
at all, not at all. I just wanted to come in there because Sue mentioned it earlier on around the importance of international relationships as well. And I've been in this role now for 12 months, and I've been absolutely blown away by how, as organisations, we work together to mitigate that threat. If we look at, and also I know that there's panelists this afternoon that are going to talk about the changing nature of that threat as well. But on a daily basis, we are sharing intelligence, we're sharing evidence across the US and Canada to mitigate that threat. We have over 800 live investigations in the UK at the moment, and since 2017 we've disrupted 43 late-stage attacks. So many of those late-stage attacks have actually been disrupted from international sharing. We're working with both Canada and with the US, so that's why it's actually a pleasure to be in this role. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alastair. Thanks. So large-scale events, right? It's one of the most. This month is one of the most insane times in New York City. You go from the U.S. Open to 9/11 to the UN General Assembly in pretty quick succession. And President Trump has thrown in 2 additional visits to New York City, one last weekend and one this coming weekend. So I know my counterparts and colleagues that are still there are just living the large-scale event concept now without any let-up. And that's a problem. It is an issue that you can't always slow down enough to think about it, and all the planning you do, it's year-round. But when those little things start to get thrown in, how do you deal with it? And so large-scale events, they can be a singular location, they could be citywide, they could be countrywide, they can be immediate in nature, like a terrorist attack or a disorderly protest that's gotten out of control or grown larger than you anticipated, or they could be like World Cup, which has been in planning now for 2 or 3 years, or annual events such as the UNGA that you always think you have it under control and you know it because it happens every year and we know how to plan for it, but there's always something that changes the dynamic of it and you have to respond to it. And then you have the 9/11s, the terrorist attacks, the active shooters that are just, so massive in nature that trying to understand what to do. So to my panelists, and I'll start with Alastair, is how do you start that process? Like, what are the steps? What are the things that you start doing at the beginning? What are the ones that are most vital, and what are the ones that you've learned over the years that you didn't anticipate being an important step?
Yeah, thanks, John. I think from a UK perspective, in terms of event planning and actually protests that happen, these particularly in the capital in London, these are a weekly occurrence. And the planning of those is extensive because, as you say, John, it can be a small event, it can be large-scale event. And the security implications of those are immense, really. But really and truly, every event starts with an application that comes into policing to host that event, and that will be received. And at that stage, we in policing will decide upon what is going to be the most appropriate response for this. Is it going to be our specialist event planners and public order commands, or it could also be a small-scale event where local policing are able to handle that. So from there, we will appoint a command structure of gold, silver, and bronze will be put in place. That gold to oversee the strategy of that event. So it could be something really high profile. Only a couple of weekends ago, we had the Notting Hill Carnival. So over a bank holiday weekend, you have over 1 million people in attendance there. And that gets planned, throughout the year, an extensive engagement with the local authority and all emergency service partners. But that command structure will be put in place, gold, silver, and bronze, and for the strategy, the tactical implication, and then to the bronze is the doing of the do, the actually boots on the ground. And then one of the most important aspects is actually meeting the organisers of those events very early in that process, because we really have to understand actually what's the history behind the event, if it's happened before, what is their experience of undertaking such an event, and then kind of anticipated numbers, all of those kind of things. Then we'll calculate whether we need to stand up a special operations room within our Met command and controls. We'll have that in place if need be, or can it be managed on a local radio system. There will then be a series of meetings where we'll bring all partners together. There'll be a gold strategy meeting. There'll be a local authority event planning meeting as well. And it's at that point that we bring in our specialist knowledge to mitigate the threat of terrorism, and they are counterterrorism security coordinators. They're highly trained personnel who have done extra courses, so to say, in what that terrorist threat will look like. They will be appointed by Gold, and they are there to put in place a plan to mitigate that threat. There are permanent members of CTSECO's security coordinators, and there are part-time members, and they are out there on a daily basis planning events. And that, once again, they will go and meet with the organizer, and most importantly, they will meet with the security teams who are on the ground. For example, Wembley Stadium, they hold multitude of sporting events and concerts and things like that. And the security teams there, highly professional, and they have day-to-day working relationships with the security coordinators. And what will happen is that those CTSECOs will consider what is the threat from a knife attack, IED, CBRN, it was mentioned earlier around cyber attacks, vehicle attacks, so from high sophistication to low sophistication. And from that, they will put in those mitigating measures, or suggest to put in those mitigating measures. So it could be your bag searches, your vehicle checks, your perimeter fencing, the ticketing behind it. So the really key issues here in planning those events, and it can be adaptive as well depending on how big and small it is that command structure in place, then the specialist knowledge to mitigate that terrorism threat.
Yeah, and do you find, so in Met Police, I think there's always a planning structure in NYPD, and it includes the local, whether it's Manhattan, South Borough, or somebody. But at some point, those of us who weigh in with our thoughts and decide that this is a high event or a medium event or a low event, we kind of recede to the background, and the patrol element is really left with this patrol special ops are left with the policing. Is it similar there? Do you have to have that transition, a handoff, where you kind of say, okay, now we're going to be with you, we're going to continue to feed you intelligence all through the event, but we are not the ones that are doing it. Is it the same in London, or is it?
It is the same. It is the same, but it's within those security control rooms, a huge amount of training that goes in there. I think actually there's a new security control room course that has been run where in the last 12 months they got 1,000 personnel through there, and that's how we work with police. Our JESSUP principles, our Joint Emergency Service Interoperability principles, and that comes into victims being at the centre of all those decision making that we make. But absolutely. Eventually, those security teams, particularly in those experienced locations, are handling that. And even if it's a small-scale event, we will be encouraging the event organisers to have stewards in place, and those stewards to be from a reputable company with liability insurance, all of those kind of things, considerations. So it's very much a partnership, and that's why those collaborative meetings from the very outset are so important.
Yeah, good. So, Dave, small event coming up, World Cup.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's in the mix. Obviously, Toronto's a major international city, so this is not an uncommon a thing for you. But it is, the eyes of the world will be upon, I think, 8 cities. There's 16 cities.
16 host cities.
Yeah. So, so how does it look in Toronto? How does it look coming into World Cup? And how are you thinking about these things?
So in Toronto, we follow the incident management system. So it's not quite the gold, silver, bronze, but it's the same thing. It's called something different. So area command, we're setting up for incident commanders at each of the venues. So our venue I have to stop calling it BMO Field because they're not a sponsor. It's Toronto Stadium, but it's BMO Field. We'll have our fan festival, which will hold up to 30,000 people. Our stadium's going through construction to hold up to 47,000 people, although the smallest venue of all 16 host cities. We will be hosting 6 games. So my team is set up in an IMS type model with investigations, operations planning, fin admin, and then now I can talk a little bit about it later, but a victim management chief role as well. This World Cup is quite different than World Cups in the past. They expanded from 32 to 48 teams. It's in 16 host cities, so 11 are in the U.S. Toronto and Vancouver are each hosting games. We have 6, Vancouver has 7, and then Mexico has 3 host cities as well. So there's a challenge there with information intelligence sharing cross-border, of course. So we're setting up, obviously, our intel. Vancouver will have an intel unit, like an intel operations center set up, and then we will feed information up to the RCMP in Ottawa, and then they will liaise and likely have people co-located in the States as well, run by the FBI. And so we're hoping, and then Mexico will do the same thing. So the hoping is the information flows up into the States, and then the information flows back. So those processes are being developed, obviously well-established partnerships as well, just utilizing those. What else can I say? Toronto is one of the most multicultural cities in the world. So the chief tournament officer of FIFA Canada, his name is Peter Montopoli, and we were in meetings with FIFA. We meet with FIFA regularly. As Alastair says, you meet with the event organizers. We've recently had 3 members retire from the Toronto Police Service, and they're now hired by FIFA. Peter Code, who many of you may know, Rick Shank, and Steve Watts. So, that working relationship is super important, and that trust factor is super important. So Peter Montopoli said, in Toronto, especially being so multicultural and all the diasporas, you can basically count on every game that you host as being a home game. So we know that our first game is on June 12th of next year. We know Team Canada is playing that game. We don't know whether the other 11 host cities are, the other 11 nations are coming. We won't know that until December 5th. So planning is challenging. We don't know if we're getting, England versus Germany.
Could be a tough match.
or any, think of worldwide events, any other, relationships between countries that may exist. So we do have our challenges cut out for us, and we're planning towards, we're sort of planning up here. It's easier to scale back, if you will, but we'll probably just plan here and stay there. Deploying over 40,000 police resources throughout the 39-day tournament.
Wow.
So it'll be a good undertaking, absolutely.
And, I know here in New York during World Cup, it's really, the games are one thing, and they're across the river in the fine state of New Jersey, but the issue here really is the communities. It's the, diaspora communities from every country in the world, and all of a sudden, you see a message come across that there's 3,000 people in the street in some obscure street in Queens that you couldn't imagine, and it's all World Cup related. And I think that, it's people center on really what FIFA wants to do, which is to worry about the games and the safety of the people coming back and forth and all that, but The challenge really is kind of predicting those spark up events and realizing that they're going to occur and that they may decide to travel or they may, and knowing the background of the countries, which I think is vital, is to know, did they have a huge brawl at their game in London or in Paris or somewhere else in the past? It's a lot of work.
So we'll be relying heavily on, we've met with the UK Football Policing Unit. When we started planning this almost 3 years ago, in fact, our first meetings were exactly 3 years ago. I had no idea what football culture is like. It is a religion.
Well, you do have hockey.
We do have hockey. It is, yeah. And there will be a Stanley Cup parade in Toronto during FIFA next year. Mark my words, that's going to be my luck.
Sounds like a Cowboy fan. No, I'm sorry.
So we learned a ton, when we started looking at this. Fan marches were not in our vocabulary.
Right.
We went to the UK, we went to Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, we went to Old Trafford, and we watched fan marches. And, from a policing perspective, you're looking at this going, they're just going wherever they want. There's no HVM, there's no hostile vehicle mitigation, there's a ton of public order, there's a ton of mounted cops, escorting these marches, but there's vulnerabilities here. So what we're doing in Toronto is I'm having our analytics and innovation unit develop a diaspora dashboard, essentially, to prepare us for that December 5th date. So they're looking at religious cultural centers, settlements within the city of Toronto. We have, Chinatown, we have Little Italy, we have Little Portugal, we have Danforth, which is Greek town, and basically, and we have, Dutch contingent in Toronto as well. So when we figure out what teams get here, come here, we can then pre-plan fan march routes. And then we'll be working with spotters. So spotters are police officers from those countries that are involved in with the football teams, and they help us. They're overt. They're not covert officers. They're overt. Fans know who they are. They know who the fans are. They know who the problem makers are, and then we can work with them and work with the fan bases of those teams to say, look, we know our city. We can help you with your fan march. Let's go this way. And then we can pre-plan for that as opposed to just, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people showing up somewhere and doing, a 3-4 kilometer march throughout our city, and we're just trying our best to shut down traffic for them. If we can pre-plan those things and put some safety safeguards in place, then we'll be a lot further ahead.
Yeah. Alistair, I'm sure you have something.
Can I follow up on
that?
Certainly. Football supporters in the UK are a unique breed. That's for sure. But what we got to say, I spoke about actually event planning in the UK earlier. When it comes to football games, soccer games, the Football Policing Unit UK they handle all of that because of the specialist knowledge that is required, and they're absolutely amazing at it. Actually, in the Club World Cup recently, we had football spotters from the 2 Premier League teams who came over here and worked with local law enforcement. And as Dave says, actually, what that is UK cops on the streets of the US and Canada who will be assisting local law enforcement in actually just the telltale signs of when something might be going wrong, suggestions, all those kind of things. But to add to that, we actually have really good legislation in the UK around football banning orders. So, and the lead up to the event, those persons who have been convicted of serious violence, for example, in the past, they will have their passports removed and they will not even be able to travel to the World Cup. So hopefully that will reduce that threat there.
I was in Qatar for their planning a year out, and that was one of their, and plus there's a lot of rules there that you can't engage in many of the activities that you would engage in anywhere else. So it was very interesting, and trying to explain to them that this is going to occur whether you authorize it or not was a difficult conversation, but they did get it, and that had a successful event. And just one other quick aside, just recently I was involved in the security for the F1 premiere in Manhattan. So you have literally like 2 blocks of Times Square blocked off, and all this, stars and everything going on, and I think Brad Pitt or one of the other stars was coming through. I know you're very familiar with Brad Pitt.
My twin brother.
It's the resemblance. Yeah, it's the resemblance. Yeah. So we thought we had it, everything's under control. We're fighting off the paparazzi. We're getting all the people through the thing. And 3 of the tourist buses in New York City come rolling down 7th Avenue, jam-packed with, 200 people in each bus, all wearing pink. And I'm like, what does this have to do with that? I can't figure it out. I'm trying to figure out what it is. And it was the Club World Cup. It was one of the countries playing in the Club World Cup, and they just screaming and yelling, and people are trying to do interviews. And I'm looking at the guy, the security head for the studio looks at us. He's like, what are we gonna do? I go, there's absolutely nothing you can do. You have to endure it, get through it, and keep moving. It's that's all. But it's completely spontaneous. So we are here at Voices, and Voices is about victims and about community. And so, my experience with victim outreach, victim work, has always been, as a police officer, and as Rebecca referred to, it's something that you do in the aftermath, and that we often do it emotionally at arm's length. We keep it out of the way of what we're trying to accomplish in that moment. Chief Pfeiffer said, communities of resilience are not built in the aftermath of tragedy. And that's a lesson for me, and I think that, Dave's, I think, going to open with us here, but, it is something you learn as you go along. And I remember when I first came to Intel, and there was the West Side attack, and it was mostly tourists from Argentina or Brazil, I should know, but I'm forgetting, that were killed. And, to suddenly realize that we had to make notifications to the consulate and assist families getting there from all over the world and those kinds of things, it really is something that strikes you that, police agencies are not always equipped to do this. And if we're not collaborating, if we're not reaching out to our partners that do this on a regular basis or that have, some degree of a path for us to follow, we're not learning, so I think it's important. But Dave, I'm going to kick it off to you. How has victim-centered become integrated into your work, and how have you thought about that?
So I'll take you back quite a few years after the Paris bombings. Our chief at the time, Jim Raymer, who many of you probably know as well, had a conversation with Peter Code and said, turned to him and said, if this happened in Toronto, are we prepared? And Peter quickly said, no, absolutely not. So as a result, we had an extreme event recommendation document drafted. I believe Peter wrote it. One of the recommendations in there was to include victim management chief as part of our IMS model. And then we had 2 other attacks in the city of Toronto. One was, we called it's the Yonge Street van attack, an individual who was inspired as a incel, drove a rental vehicle van down Yonge Street, which is a quite busy street. I think it's one of the longest streets in the world. But in North York, which is the north part of Toronto, ramming people, killed 10, injured 16. Major event in our city, major extreme event in our city. You can just imagine the victims involved in that. When we talk about victims, we talk about the deceased, we talk about the friends and family, of course, and we talk about the first responders. And then later that summer, we had an individual walk down on a Sunday evening in July, walk down Danforth Avenue, which is our Greek town in the city, with a firearm and just randomly shooting people. Now, the interesting part about that, and I believe that the Danforth is maybe the next slide, is I was the acting duty inspector that night. We didn't have permanent duty inspectors. It was just sort of staff sergeants that, they asked to put their hand up to work a week of midnight shift as the junior senior officer. So I had done it a few times. And I thought, here I am getting to the end of my week, and it's, should be a quiet Sunday evening, and, we never use the Q word. And I was driving into the city. I was in the city around 10 p.m. and I called our Toronto Police Operations Center because there was a bunch of fire trucks on one of the streets downtown on King Street. And I asked why there was fire trucks there, and I hadn't been notified. And the individual that answered the phone, the staff sergeant in Teapot, used a lot of expletives and said, "I don't really care about the fire trucks on King Street. You know what's going on Danforth?" And I said, "No." He said, "Turn over to 55 Division Band," so they flip over the radio. And what I proceeded to hear was the live broadcast of the dispatcher talking about this individual walking westbound on Danforth and shooting people. And so I raced to the scene. I was there within minutes, and I could still smell the gunpowder in the air. That will be a night that will forever be imprinted in my brain. And just seeing all the people that had been shot, asking for help. There was, police officers on the radio begging for ambulances. As a result of that, dozens injured, 2 young girls were murdered. In that, the police engaged this individual. There was a foot pursuit, and he was able to get around a quarter and died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. So when I got there, the scene was set up fairly quickly, and it was just managing that. I spent 5 years in the homicide squad, and your focus is, catch the bad guy, lock up the bad guy. And so that was my focus that night. I lead from paramedic services and fire, and tried to sort of set up a joint incident command. And what I quickly realized about incident command is it's only as good as the people that know it. So getting that information, important information for me to know as the incident commander now of this incident, of this scene, how many victims do I have? What hospitals do they go to? What are the nature and extent of the injuries? And I couldn't get that information. So my chief, Mark Saunders, shows up, and he's asking me these questions. And I don't have the answers because I can't get them. I've got, people going to multiple hospitals, and I'm saying, park enforcement, get down to Hospital Row, clear out all the cars for access, egress to the hospitals. I'm ordering all these things to be done, to do this, to manage the scene and the incident that's happening. And in Ontario, we have what's called a Special Investigations Unit, and they investigate incidents where there's, they investigate the police. If there's an incident where we shoot somebody, where somebody's admitted to the hospital, sexual assault, or if we end up, killing somebody, the SIU, which is a provincial body, investigates that. So I'm also dealing with an SIU investigation because the police engaged this individual prior to him taking his life. So that's an automatic SIU investigation. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. And in my mind, that really underscored the need that we need this victim management chief. So now, as a result of all of these things, we do have that. It's not mandated, but as you can see on our org chart here, so this is our typical IMS, and we now have a victim management chief. Part of that is training members of our service, both uniform and civilian members, is what we call FLO, family liaison officers. So because of my experience on Danforth, I get the privilege of going and speaking to the class. It's a 2-week class, and talk to them about my experiences on Danforth that night and everything I went through. And what I do is when I go through my presentation, I say to them, walk with me through this incident, and knowing what you've learned and what you're about to learn, stand beside me as I walk you through this incident, and tell me where you would be able to help me. And hopefully that sort of puts them in the moment and lets them experience, like, this is a real event, and what would I do as a flow? The course it's a great course. We bring in, it's run by Danielle Bottineau, out of our emergency management and public order unit, who many of you probably know as well. She's, excellent in this space. And she brings in speakers like Sushil Gupta, whose mother was killed in the area India bombings 40 years ago, brings in Dr. John Nicoletti to talk about that victim-centered approach and why that's important. And as we know, the more timely, the proper resources at the right time, can help victims become more resilient when they are given the resources and the support as soon as we can get that. So now we are setting up for the World Cup a Friends and Family Assistance Center. We'll be activating our FLOs. We have 40 trained right now. We're looking, hopefully get another class in by the end of the year if we can pull that off, just so we can have more available for FIFA. That will involve setting up, an intake number, 1-800 number. So in the event, you plan for these things hoping you never have to activate, but in the event we have a mass casualty incident, we can quickly get that communication strategy out. Here's a 1-800 number. Somebody's from another country looking for their loved one and they can't get a hold of them, they can call a 1-800 number, they can get some information, they can go online, they can fill out an intake form with that information. That gets fed through us to our flows, who will be dispatched to hospitals and start doing that family reunification piece. And then, so we actually, funny enough, I had a meeting last week, and there's pretty much a full day planning meeting this Friday to set all of this process up and finalize it, utilizing our partners, Toronto Emergency Management, Sunnybrook Hospital, other trauma centers, our hospital network in Toronto, Toronto Fire, Toronto Paramedic Services, and of course us to set this up. So it's in the early stages, but we're sort of trying to leverage FIFA as a reason to do a lot of these things, a lot of new innovative things. So as we say, necessity is the mother of invention. So we need to have this up and running, this FFAC ready to go, everybody ready to go in the event of a mass casualty. So that's how we're planning.
Yes, it's definitely thoughtful. It's like I said, it's often done in the aftermath here, and there are so many great organizations and even other agencies, other city agencies that step into the void there, and I think that's Toronto, to kind of bring them into the fold and make it a formalized thing is important, and it's important to have it in your planning. It's you're looking at it from many months ahead of it. So, and I was thinking, and Alastair, you've obviously been some major attacks in the UK. How do you? I was thinking about one thing that I wanted to get to is I was watching the coverage in Minneapolis last week, and I thought the police chief did a remarkable job of conveying the impact, not just on the community, not just on the event, but on also the cops who responded, the cops who were the first through the door, dealing with children, imagining that scene and having to, hold off parents until they could figure out who was who. And, it's an incredibly emotional thing. And you're still expected to fulfill all your duties. And to think about that as you do the planning is to say, there's real impact on all sorts of people here that are going to just continue to do their job because they have to. But, who's the follow-up? Who's going to make sure that, who's talking to them 24 hours out in NYPD? If you have a cop get into a shooting or something, you really, there's a lot of people that don't understand the impact it is for especially for cops. I had a cop tell me once, and it's just, not about me, but it was, he was involved in a shooting. It was a really traumatic event. It looked like his partner was about to get shot, and he was able to intercede right at the second before it happened. And as a commanding officer, you always respond to these jobs. But, when I got there, I walked in the door and he said, "Boss, as soon as I saw your face, I knew I was going to be okay." He said, I knew that you were on my team and that we were good. And that's not me, John Hart. It's me in the role of leader to say, "Hey, I'm here. I'm going to stand by you. We're going to make sure that you're okay, and we're going to be here for you through it." But But Alastair, I know, you maybe talk about the 2017 attacks as well, and then they passed laws now in the UK that are, significant laws that help support this mission.
Yeah, I'll talk about Martin's Law, and I know Sue spoke about that earlier on, but just in terms of that victim-centred approach, in the UK, exercise testing over and over and over again. Just within the last 12 months, we've carried out 6 terrorism exercises at football stadiums. So a huge amount of, and at those stages, so no role players at that. But at the end of those 12 months, it culminated in an exercise at the O2 Arena where we had 600 role players, many of whom amputees, and carried out a terrorist incident that happened there, really bringing in those JESUP principles, those Joint Emergency Service Interoperability principles, and that victim-centered approach being at the heart of that. Mm-hmm. And for example, learning off the back of that came 30 recommendations. And one of those is very much around deploying medical personnel into a scene, but escorted by firearms officers, something that we really haven't done before. But in the UK, when we look at that victim-centered approach, you have the investigation to start with, the coronial process, public inquiries as well. When I was the senior investigating officer for the murder of Sir David Amis, a member of Parliament, one of our biggest focuses from the outset was looking at the perpetrator, Ali Harbi Ali. What contact had he had with policing before? And he had contact with our prevent system, and actually looking at how did we manage that and how can we learn from that as a victim-centered approach. Then after every terrorist incident, we will go through a coronial process. That coronial process will consider who, where, when and how it happened, and a prevention of future death report will come out the back of that, which will make recommendations, once again, around that victim-centered approach. Then you will have, undoubtedly, just going back to that coronial process, one that's just gone through is off the back of the Salisbury poisonings in 2018. So where 2 Russian GRU agents came over with Novichok and attempted to kill Yulia and Sergei Skripal. And very sadly, the nerve agent had been contained within a perfume bottle which had been discarded in a park, picked up by a lady called Dawn Sturgis, who subsequently sadly died. And that coronial process is looking at, the judgment's not out at the moment, did we do enough to protect the public in terms of that victimization? Then we go on to the public inquiries as well, so government-initiated inquiries, which will look to apportion blame and a series of recommendations. And Sue mentioned Martin's Law, Martin Hett, who one of the 22 victims of the Manchester Arena bombing, and his mother, Fegan Murray, has driven legislative change in the UK over many years. And this year, that terrorism protection of persons, premises law has come into statute. It has received royal assent, and it is an absolute game changer in terms of mitigating terrorism incidents within premises. And it has 2 levels. So you have a standard level, which is any premises which will contain between 200 and 799 persons, and then a more advanced level, which is 800 plus. And it can be, these venues can be shops, restaurants, bars, nightclubs, arenas, it can be everything. And for those standard, those venues within a standard category, it's not necessarily physical aspects that they have to bring in to mitigate that threat of a terrorist incident, but it's more knowledge of staff, it's locks on the doors, safe routes out. And then for those advanced venues, it's bag searches, CCTV, vehicle mitigation, all of these kind of things put in place. And it forces the industry to recognize what they can do. And there's a regulator behind it, the Security Investigation Authority, and there will be punishments for businesses who do not comply. So an absolute huge step forward in terms of protecting the public, reducing the number of victims, reducing that terrorist threat.
Yeah, I think we would be well served to look at that legislation here, because it does fall on police departments and policing and fire departments to really, and they're great partners, and John Eversole was going to be here and couldn't make it, but he would have talked about it. There are, leaders in the pack who are always thoughtful about those things and are great partners. So it's not to criticize all, private entities, but the mandate now that you must take an active role in your own security, your own safety, I think is really thoughtful. So when you build out these things, you're building triage, medical teams, all those things into it from the get-go, so it's all set in place ahead of time. And I was thinking what you were just talking about is that the Chief Pfeiffer actually was instrumental in this as the rescue task forces, which are here in the U.S. and I believe in Canada as well. Yeah, so
Yep.
It's a planned team that gets together anytime there's a major event. They're ahead of it. They're set in place, and it's an armed team, paramedics, and I think there's even like a social worker or a mental health element to that that helps out. And they're already in place, ready to go if there's a major event. So it's good to hear that everybody's kind of thinking along the same lines there.
I think it's really important with the events that we plan. So our protective security operations plan those events. But how does any terrorist incident start? It starts with local policing being called to a venue because there might be, a gang fight in an area. So you've got local cops, probably less than 2 years service, turning up to that incident, and then the incident's playing out, different factors coming in. It could be a marauding terrorist attack, and then that's that whole of emergency service response to it. But it has to start off at that local level, doesn't it, for everyone to experience that.
That's who's going to be. We say that often here, is that the first two guys to the door are going to be from a local precinct.
Yeah.
And, we just had the shooting at 345 Park, office building, middle of Manhattan, really one of the most thoughtful and layered security plans for a major building that I know of. And, it's the entire event from the moment he walks through the door until the moment he kills himself is 6 minutes. 6 minutes. So even though Manhattan's, and New York City has as much resources as anyone else, and the cops were on the scene almost immediately, did a great job, kept other people safe. But when you think about that, it's a daunting time frame to really deal with. So it's mandatory that we support the first two people that are going to be on that scene, and they know what actions to take. Sue, did you want to jump in now? I think, yeah.
Because I've had the privilege of working with so many people internationally. I'm going to come up here because those that know me have a couple points. Those that do know me. I was looking to see if Ann is here. Ann Seymour, is she here? She's coming. Okay. So, sorry? She's back? Okay. So first of all, can I just say this? I've had the privilege of working with many of these police services. I'm also the executive director of the Link Alumni Canada. But I recently stepped down after 5 or 6 years, as good people do, to put in 2 fabulous new co-chairs of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police National Working Group that we have had formed for the last 5 or 6 years. And I do have to point out Deputy Chief Rob Johnson, who's here, who's one of our biggest supporters. Thank you, Rob. Because it is about leadership. It's about talking to the leaders, getting to understand why it's so important. And so when you look at, we had to look at back then, at what are the 2 kind of key models that we've seen out there. And one, of course, is the FBI rapid response teams that work with and have responded to many. And also with the UK, the FLOW program. We have Pete Sparks, your retiree, who's a member of Invictum. We also have Andy Rhodes from the National Police Wellness Service for as a member of Invictum. So we've had this opportunity to look at the models that are out there. And I think there's no surprise why you see 3 agencies up here. It's the understanding that when you look at what are the needs of victims of people who have been, have been a victim of a tragedy or lost a loved one or a first responder, it is a continuum. So the main two messages here is you need to pre-plan for this. You need to pre-plan so that when the tragedy happens, you're able to respond effectively. It is a multi-agency response. And I am going to use the Toronto Police Service. I could use the OPP. I could use Vancouver. Because with the National Working Group, we have 40 champions across this country who learn from each other. We've taken down the usual obstacles when you have to go up a chain of command and down again, because we have the support of the Canadian Police leadership to do this. But we get the information and the ideas and what we do, and we make it applicable to our country and our communities. We get that from listening to our international colleagues. And so when you look at the FLOW program, let's say as one example, but also the FBI rapid response teams, we're different in Canada. We have a huge, massive rural community. Many of our mass violence incidents have occurred in rural communities, such as the mass shooting in Nova Scotia a few years ago. We had a mass casualty commission around that. But what my message to you is this: you need to pre-plan for this. And people say to me, I will say, in all the communities in North America or in other countries, you have good leaders, you have good emergency response plans, you have great service providers. But what's different in a mass violence? So we've created we have about 22 protocols that we speak to. Obviously, I'm not going to say that here, but there'll be no surprise to anyone in this room or who's listening or virtually, is that one of the number one challenge that everyone faces, and it was spoken to already, is how do you manage the victims list? And if you haven't got that in place ahead of time, looked at your own legislation, your privacy, and the rest of that, and how to do this, have you looked at in your community who is your medical response team? So when I look at the Toronto Police model, they have an excellent relationship with their main trauma hospital for the Greater Toronto Area, and that's Sunnybrook. So the head of the emergency management of Sunnybrook Hospital is actually on the National Working Group. Because if you're going to make this work, you all need to be, Joseph Pfeiffer, when he spoke this morning, he couldn't have said it any better. We're in this together. We need to be planning together for this. And if you look at, and Mary's always spoken about, you're asking your members in a mass violence, I can't even imagine in 9/11 with the amount, how do you do death notifications? Have you trained your people on how to do that? Do you know how to do that when it's in another country and doing that? And so if you have in place and you understand that continuum, and I think a lot of communities will be there in the first short term, but as it gets to medium and long term, very few that look at the long term. And if you think about it, most people that worked on the 9/11 investigations, most of the police and the people that were involved in that are retired. And so how do you maintain that? Voices has the ability to do that. That's why people go to Voices when they're looking for just a recent one, brand new DNA identification. And so when you look at those, and the other is we learn from each other. So for example, within Victim, we have an international response network. We do not interfere in any of the consular services or anything like that, but we can do what government agencies can't, is we can be flexible and nimble. So we can reach out, and I will say pretty much any country, be it, we reached out after the concert attacks in Moscow. We reach out in Indonesia. We're also, myself and Lev, who heads Victims, we're also members of Victim Support Asia. We're working in South America. So we have the ability to be very flexible and nimble to provide support to people and loved ones who are in other countries, again, without interfering in those government processes. And we actually recently did one where we were able to have a response from one country request to the other to support a family who lost a loved one within about 2 hours. So these are the things that we can do, and that's why civil society, and why I say that victims and families and all those people that are impacted are partners in public safety. And that's how we're going to get it right, when we all work together and understand and have pre-deployed around that. And I'm only using Toronto as an example, please. Well, maybe because Rob's here and Dave, but they took this on years ago. I remember when Danielle says, oh, this is like drinking from a fire hose, when she first started this. But she got, and I'm going to say, the kind of relationships that you can build and the opportunities. So for example, the FLOW program, they actually have a course called the BOLT course. It's a 5-day course that's specific to counterterrorism, and it's your experienced FLOW investigators. So we were invited because I said, oh, we've got FIFA coming up. And so I immediately put somebody from Toronto and Vancouver onto Invictum a while back so that they would have access to all of the expertise that's available internationally. It's too late to build those relationships once it happens. And so Toronto and Vancouver now have access to all the expertise internationally through Invictum, any questions they have, any lessons learned. And so one of the things that they've done as well is they've embedded it into the incident command structure. I do have faint memories of my 30 years in policing, but I was an incident commander as well. And so when you have somebody that's actually embedded in their incident command process and actually has what we in the policing world, former policing world for me, would say an immediate action plan. So they do this, obviously for pre-planned, but they can still have all of that framework is in place should it be an unplanned event. So when you look at that, you need to be really asking yourselves and your communities, do you have those in place? Are you ready to respond? Do you have the people trained to do that? When you hear about the FLOW program, the Family Liaison program in the UK, they are trained, seasoned investigators. The FLOW program in Toronto is a slightly different approach, but it suits their community, and it suits how they do business, and they have an excellent victim services, Toronto Victim Services civilian organization that does amazing work and is in support for them. And so it's how do you embed this in that? There are no surprises here. You know what the predictable challenges are going to be in a major incident, be it communication, be it doing the victims list, responding, all that goes with that. But at the end of the day, if you can't, it's not often I quote a lawyer, but let me quote a lawyer. Did you have a plan? Did you practice the plan? Were the decisions you made reasonable given the information you have? And you won't always get it right. But if you can't answer that first question, you can't get to the next questions. So one thing I'm very proud of in the international community is through Invictum, we partnered with the National Police Wellness Service, alias Oscar Kilo. And Andy Rhodes says, hey, Sue, he says, do you guys want to do a big virtual tabletop training scenario? I said, yes, we do. He says, what's your budget? I said, it's zero. What's yours? So he was able to get the right company involved. And we did an immersive technology. But what we built, and we went to Canada because we looked at the US has the rapid response teams, the FLOW. Long story short, Toronto Police and the Ontario Provincial Police came on board, significant investment in their people and their time. But they can now say, we've practiced the plan. And it's a series of 4 videos. The Invictum uses them, Toronto uses them to train all the time as well. And it's too late. If you haven't trained your people how this is all going to come together and look at the human side of what needs to be in place to support people. So we practice, and Andy says, well, easy for him, he has a 4-phase response plan for supporting members involved in a critical incident. We have about 27 or 28 points that we wanted, so we cherry-picked about 7 what we felt were the ones that needed to be practiced the most. And we still use those videos to train today, and we still communicate. And I'll just finish up by saying this. I said that, so the opportunity, for example, so both the representative from Toronto Police and from Vancouver Police on Invictum also had the opportunity to learn from France Victim. France Victim was the support agency for the Paris Olympics and Paralympics. So we've had the opportunity, and that's just one example that we get to learn from, debrief with, and learn how we can do this better and what we need to be thinking about. The last thing I'll say is that we often talk about responding. Very few talk about, you mentioned the Novichok attack, talk about how are you prepared to respond and support victims in a CBRNE incident. We do that. We look at large communication models, how you do that. How would you actually physically respond? I will tell you, Dr. Ann Verst, many of you have heard her speak before, who are with Invictum and Link, and she has worked a tremendous amount of work, actually with Pete as well. We're coming up with 2 papers that are going to be released from Invictum, one on large-scale events from the victim's perspective, and the other one is going to be on responding, psychosocial response to CBRE incidents. And I will proudly tell you that tomorrow, Dr. Alexander Hebert and Dr. Margaret McKinnon are here to present Can Emerge. Canada, through Public Health, has developed a site called Can Emerge, and it's basically psychosocial response toolkits and information for people responding to disasters, including human disasters, such as terrorism, caused by human. So I just want to say this, is that this is such an opportunity for all of you in this room and on the line virtually, because you can all reach out to us after virtually, is to really think about what do you have in place? Are you ready to respond? And if you practice that response from the human side. And I will say this, let me quote Catherine Turman from the FBI. Many of you will know Catherine, she's one of our original leaders here. And she says, I have a quote she says, the number one thing you will be judged on, should there be a mass violence or mass victimization incident, is how well you are prepared to support, to treat, to take care of the victims, the family members, your own members. And I say, that's the way it should be. We should be accountable for what we have in place. And I just recently, this is like 3 or 4 days ago, Oscar Kilo just put out and updated their guidelines for responding to major incidents, and they clearly lay out the responsibility of the gold, silver, bronze commanders based on all the lessons learned. And it is a living entity of what we do, but the opportunities that this symposium provides, and I am very proudly one of the original members of the Link alumni, and I will say this, we start right from the first conference, we had the victim's voice at the table. We will never do work without having that. It is at the heart of what we do with the Leadership and Counterterrorism Alumni Association as well. So thanks for letting me speak, but I felt John wasn't here, so we had time. And what time is it right now? Is it 10 o'clock?
Yeah.
Okay, it's bang on. Technically, you're not supposed to break till 10:15. We have a gift today. But I just want to say this to the 3 panelists first. I want to thank you for what you do and your openness to listening and learning about that. John, your 31 career year, and you're now with a public safety consultant. And Alastair, it's our first time meeting, but I have worked with all your colleagues and continue to in the UK, and it's just a privilege to meet you. And thank you, Dave, alias Brad. I have to tell you, he's got a great sense of humor. Okay, Dave. So I didn't really know him much, but I said, oh, I'm going to like this guy. He's going to be my BFF by the end of this symposium. Thank you for what you're doing for FIFA. And Rob, thank you for, Rob is also the co-chair of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police Counterterrorism National Security Committee. I've had the privilege of working with, including Jim Raymer and Mark Saunders and now Rob, the kind of commitment that the leadership, none of this could happen without your leadership and without the Canadian and the international police leadership saying this needs to be done, this is a priority, and we're going to deliver on this. And we're constantly learning, but the beauty of just being able to share and pick up the phone and have those relationships and learn from each other is what is going to carry us into the future and get us to make sure that we are prepared, we can respond, and we can be accountable for that response. So thank you all.